Hello and welcome to another episode of Framlingham College In Conversation. This is the second episode in our EDI series entitled Is It OK To?, where two pupils put a series of questions from our community to an expert in their field. Today's episode is on racism, and our expert today is Jemma Roye. Jemma has worked with us before delivering hard-hitting and thought-provoking workshops on racism. Her organisation is called Let's Start a Conversation, and she has very much started a conversation around this important issue in the EDI space at Framlingham College. Welcome, Jemma.
Thank you for having me here.
We're also joined by Mimi, our Wellbeing Prefect, and Abdul, our EDI Prefect. Welcome to both of you as well.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Right, let's dive in with some questions. Who wants to go first?
Is it okay to imitate the accent of people from any European country?
I think firstly, before we kind of take a deep dive into these themes, this is a really fluid space, and I think it's important to know with some of these questions, it might lend itself to more questions than answers. And there isn't always a neat, tidy fit and a neat, tidy answer. So when we come to questions and spaces of imitation and mimicking accents, I think it's a sensitive arena, and we need to be very careful of the intentions and what are we doing that for, and the way it may potentially land and offend. So I think when it comes to imitating any accents, be it European or not, we need to be sensitive and potentially just think, how might this land? How might this cause offence? And what could be the impact? If there's any doubt it could hurt, if there's any doubt it could cause pain, I will always encourage to just not go there. And it's a tricky one because I opened up something similar to some students I work with, and we were looking at the role of drama, right? When we're acting or we're taking on a role. Unless it's done well, again, it can be very, very triggering. So I think in this particular answer to this response, my advice would be no, unless there is a real sensitivity and authenticity to it. I mean, what do you guys think?
I've personally never done that, just because I just don't want to enter a space where someone could be hurt and offended by that. So, I agree with you on that. I think if it's not your space to do that, I would prefer not to personally and just stay out of that. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I suppose what springs to mind with me is the sort of field of comedy where this sort of thing seems to be totally accepted. I mean, is that okay, or is that not okay? I suppose that raises another question. Is it okay to laugh if someone is pretending to be, I don't know, stereotypical around a particular culture?
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because when I was raising it with some of my students, there was this sense of, reinforcement of stereotypical thinking. And when, individuals take on another accent, a lot of the time that is rooted in discriminationary stereotypes, and you're just reinforcing that. Yeah. And, that is a danger. So again, I agree with you there. Yeah.
Is it okay to say a person is black?
Yeah, so I think, again, this is really interesting. Now, just to give you some context, I work with lots of schools very similar to Framlingham, in different capacities, from, one-to-one mentoring, staff training, student presentations. But one of my most, privileged roles is I head up a huge, incredible body of students from African, Caribbean and racially minoritized communities. And the group is there really to provide a safe space to unite. And there are about 40 students. And I am very honoured to learn from them. And also, as I said, my experiences of what I do come from working with schools, but I'm not a student. It's a totally different space. So I think really being humbled to how they felt. So I asked them this question, is it okay to say a person is black? And unanimously, they all said yes. Okay, they all said yes, because there's a sense of, well, that's what I am. And sometimes there's a real tiptoeing around it, but that's how I racially identify. But what they did express was a preference to not be called out or to not be identified as that as their first point. So if they're, as a group of students, someone's race is not their full identity. So if we, are talking about trying to identify a student, let's try and find other ways to do that first before immediately going to the go-to of that black student or that mixed heritage student or that Southeast Asian student. But in a sense, to answer that, yeah, it's comfortable, it's okay. We would, when we talk about someone as black, we always use it capitalised. So, as opposed to how it's written here. But yeah, it is. It's okay to. But here's my most important take home is ask. I think that's really important to ask somebody. How do you racially identify, or what's your cultural heritage? Because sometimes we can racialise people and they're not actually that. So I'm mixed heritage. My dad's black, my mother's white. I'm often racialised as white, which is okay because I am, and I'm very proud of my Scottish roots, but I'm not white. I look very European, so people see me and I'm a white person with a tan, and that's not who I am. So it's easy to look at someone and assume. So just going back to that, should I say a person is black? Firstly, have you got that right? And would that person racially identify as black? And if you're not sure, ask. And also try to identify someone in a different characteristic first. That'd be my sort of first response to that. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of that sort of question comes up later as well, and it's that idea of, for example, if you, I suppose, is it okay if you're looking out across a crowd and you're identifying things, and clearly the most identifiable factor of a particular individual might be the colour of their skin. I think the other question is around that. Is it like, can you say, the black person over there, or is that not okay? I think, which I think you just answered probably.
Yeah.
Find another
if we can,
identifiable feature.
Yeah, I think it's just more respectful, it's more inclusive, and it takes time, and that's the thing. We're all products of our, our socialisation, and unconsciously we might just go to identifying someone's race as that first go-to, but it just takes a little bit of intentionality and just pausing and finding another is what came through from talking to my students.
I think also in a whiter community or Caucasian community, like you have to think, would I go that white student? You know what I mean? Like
That's so true.
Like that's what you think about. It's like, would you go that white person over there? Would you go whatever you would like, that sporty person or that, you know what I mean? It's like, if you know someone, for example, plays sport because you've seen them on the hockey pitch and they are, you know what I mean? You just, a white person, then would you say that white, you know what I mean? It's just like thinking about that, how would you speak about someone who maybe is like white, like, do you know what I mean? It's just interesting because I don't think you would.
Yeah, and that's kind of the standard of whiteness we have as a dominant culture, so it's always our default. But I think it's really important you raise the context of the space, because if you are racially minoritized and you're in what we call a PWI, predominantly white institution or white space, you're already the minoritized or the other. So if you're already calling that person out as, like you said, the hockey match and that black student, it's just, it isn't reinforcing othering, but it could be, So it's just being sensitive to that. Yeah.
Is it okay to say I like someone's braids or afro hairstyle without being accused of being racist? For me personally, I think whatever you like is what you like, especially in this scenario with braids or an afro hairstyle, liking it and not being black. I don't think you should be accused of being racist, because it's just, in my opinion anyway, a hairstyle that you might look at and be like, oh, that person or that group of people look nice with that hairstyle. It doesn't necessarily mean that you'd want to recreate that with your hair or have any like negative connotations towards it. I think if you like someone's hairstyle, you like someone's hairstyle pretty much. That's what I have to say.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. I think there's a power in complimenting and there's a power in recognising the beauty of a hairstyle. So if you are genuinely coming from a place of sincerity and saying, I really like your braids, that's not racist at all. There's a different space when we talk about cultural appropriation, but I think that might come up later. But no, recognising and appreciating cultural diversity and showing up and saying that actually for that person could go a really long way. So just being careful and mindful how it's done, and there's a real sense of, as I said, authenticity behind that. I think it's not racist to compliment someone's braids or afro hairstyle.
Is it okay to ask where the family originates from?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it goes back to, again, just really thinking about inclusive, respectful language. But being careful here, because, what is it we want to know? So I moved originally from South East London to Dorset. I'm continually asked, where are you from? I'm from here. No, where are you really from?
Yeah.
No, where are you really from? But 3 reallys.
Yeah.
And it's already, that question sort of speaks volumes to, a sense of you don't really belong here. So where do you belong? So I think just attaching what is it you want to know? Is it, where the family originates from, their cultural heritage? And if so, ask that, which we can see in that question. Where is your family originally from? Or, what's your family's cultural heritage? Or are you asking where that person lives and their locality, in terms of their location? Because where you are from, it can be triggering, so I think just be careful taking time with that question. But it's really good to ask people, about themselves. Our culture is a huge part of our identity. So when someone genuinely asks about your family and where, your heritage is, it goes far. So I think, yes, just asking, but being careful how you're asking. So if someone wants to say, where does your family originate from? That's absolutely fine.
Ask someone how they identify. For me, I don't know whether this could be sexually or I still don't know about racially, to be honest. But I guess everybody can have their own sort of identity. I think it's important that we ask people how they identify, especially from a sexual perspective, because everyone's has their own right to identify however they want to, whether it's non-binary or if they're part of the LGBT community. I think that's completely fine. But there is a bit of sensitivity to that, because if you're genuinely asking someone for their opinion on how they identify, to respect them, to then call them how they want to be identified, then that's good to ask them. But I think if you ask someone to sort of hit the mick out of them, then that's not on at all. So there is definitely some sensitivity about that question, but I think it's good to ask someone how they identify.
And in a racial context, Jemma, what would we say?
Yeah, I think very much, as Abdul was saying here, there's a real power in questioning and asking, hence my company's called Let's Start a Conversation. The way we talk and dialogue, we learn so much about each other. So asking someone how they identify, that's a huge, vague question. But again, racially, I think it's important because there's a difference between how we identify racially and how we are racialized. And society will often racialize an individual, as I said earlier, incorrectly. And often those racialized assumptions are linked on prejudice or stereotypes or unconscious bias. So we've got to be careful. And I think asking is important. What I think is also a huge part of this conversation is the response, because someone can say, I identify as, and then it's like, oh, really? It's how that then is received and their response that can really be a danger. So thinking carefully about, 70% of communication is body language, is non-verbal. So just little things like that. So when I've said, I'm a mixed heritage, I didn't think that. I didn't, well, I am, and it's, it's that. So it's the response, I think, where the power lies.
I would ask though, when it comes to the future, because obviously a lot of my auntie, she works in an advertising agency, and someone who's involved in the agency, their job is inclusion, and that's their job to make sure the agency's doing that. And it's interesting because I know that in emails she has to put her preferences of she, her, or they, or pronouns. That's what she has to do. And I'm thinking, for a school, is it going to be a thing where you come in and you go, these are my pronouns, this is how because I think registers, for example, and stuff like that, it's interesting, because if you're doing that in the workplace, is that something that has to be here? I don't know, you know what I mean? I don't know if that's a conversation.
It's certainly something, we talk about. And I know some organisations insist on that. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting talking about email signatures, because Jemma, your email signature is quite interesting. Can you tell us about that?
So my pronouns, and then I have how my name is said, and then I have my cultural heritage at the end of it. My cultural heritage is Trinidadian and Scottish, because I think it's so important, and I'm proud of that. But also I think, I know what it's like to navigate the world where people get that wrong and just assume. And I've got, I have the power to do that. I have the right to make sure that how I am, racialized is correct. So I think there's a strength in having that, and for people to to make that clear, because I think, as Sir was saying, I've worked with many students that have got black parents, but they look very white presenting. In fact, there's an amazing family where they're twins, and one twin is very white presenting and one twin is very black presenting, and they're mixed heritage. And interesting to actually hear their experience of going through their schooling. It's very different. But yeah, just being careful to get that really right. So as we go back to, it's a huge part of it is the assumption and the response, I think, in that question.
Yeah.
Is it okay to wear traditional clothing from a culture that isn't your own to a themed event or celebration?
Can I ask you, Abdul, what you say to that?
Overall, I think, yes, definitely it's okay, I'd say, to wear traditional clothing from another culture that isn't yours for specific reasons, though. I feel like if you want to wear it to show it off and embrace somebody else's culture, I think that's beautiful, actually. I think that should be encouraged. But you do have the odd, like, wearing, for example, I'm Pakistani, but I'm Muslim as well. So a lot of connotations behind, like, the Saudi thobes and, like, that sort of dresses obviously have bad connotations with things like terrorism and stuff from, previous times. So I feel like there has been, like, points where people might like take the mick out of that and wear like a thobe and be like, yeah, I'm dressing up as a terrorist and things like that. I've seen that. But no, I think traditional clothing to embrace another culture is definitely something that is fine, should be done. And if it's done well, then I think it's beautiful, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good response. And I really do agree and support that. I think we live in a multicultural society, even though sometimes parts of the world we don't, live and reflect that, but it's the truth. And there is a beauty in celebrating that and being proud to have access to such a wealth and range of different cultures. So I think when it comes to this question, is it okay to wear traditional clothing from a culture that isn't your own to a themed event or celebration? There's an invitation there, isn't there? A sense of, inviting that person, whether it's a wedding or, a cultural occasion. And like Abdul was saying, there's a real beauty in cultural appreciation. I think where there is some confusion and a danger is when it becomes cultural appropriation, which is very different. And that is a sense of kind of borrowing or taking someone's culture without permission and using that for self-gain or self-profit or self-promotion. So you might see someone wearing a cultural, attire to something like Halloween, or, wearing a bindi for fashion purposes, or taking an Afro-Caribbean hairstyle and wearing it because it looks nice. And I think that's where I think we need to really pause, because there is a deep-rooted experience and tradition and culture that is embedded in these expressions of culture. When we start to see a dominant culture, such as, white European culture, taking it without that awareness of the history, it's really harmful. And I, again, go back to this incredible student body of students from Black and brown minoritized communities. And I said to them, how do you feel about, I'm going to, again, be really, really honest with this, how do you feel about white people having cane row or dreadlocks or, And it was a mixed conversation. Some students were like, yeah, I see it as support. I see it as, an appreciation. But for many, I'd say 3/4, there was like, no, you don't have the right to wear your hair like that. Because if we think about why we have cultural hairstyles, particularly when we look at braids, go back to the days of enslavement, and that was a form of expression and identity when there was not the freedom to do that. So certain hairstyles expressed tribal connections or heritage or ancestry. It was a form of unique expression. And then we see it now just becoming a fashion piece, or just worn with a privilege of, knowing there's not the same level of discrimination or barriers that are there for people of colour. We know hair discrimination is a really real thing. Have your hair straight, it looks more professional. Statistics show that you're more likely to be appointed or seen as more polished if your hair is, a certain way. So I think unless there is a real commitment to learning about the real history of cultural clothing or hairstyles or, parts of a culture, then I don't really know. I think it's tricky. I think be careful, because for many it can be offensive. It is, if it's cultural appropriation rather than appreciation.
Is it okay to ever use the N-word if you aren't black?
What a question.
Yeah.
All right, this is getting into the depths of, I think, what we need to talk about. And this is complex. I mean, I do a whole kind of like 90-minute, 2-hour session on unpacking the N-word here. And I think just to hold space, this is probably going to take some time to answer. Yeah. Is it okay to use the N-word if you are not black? I think what I've learned from my work with amazing young people across all different racial demographics is that there's not enough knowledge about what this word means and what this word holds and what this word is wrapped up in. We hear it in music, we hear it in rap, hip hop, we hear it in social media. It's a word we will encounter. That's inevitable. But when we really unpack it with young people, do you know the weight of this word? Do you know why this word was created? Do you know the full word, not just the euphemism? So we're seeing the euphemism here, right, which only came about in the 1970s. Before that, it was the full word. And if we see the N-word, and actually we really need to understand that for people of colour, it is the full entirety of the word. It's not that softened version, it is the full word. It brings a different lens to the conversation, right? It brings the trauma and the pain and the weaponization of a word designed to actually dehumanize a community. So again, I went back to my students. So we're talking about 40 students here from year 7 right up to year 13 that racially identify as black. And I said to them, is it okay to ever use the N-word if you are not black? And every single student said, no, it is not. And then we began to unpack the why. This word, I mean, I'm just going to read if I can. I've got it on my phone. I guess, it's quite painful to hear, but this is how this word lands with people of colour. Okay, when we hear this word, these are some common, responses to it. 6 simple letters that convey centuries of pain, evil, and contempt. Our cruelest word, the most toxic in the English language. It occupies a place in the soul where reason and logic should never go. It's the filthiest, dirtiest, nastiest word in the English language. Now, there are racial slurs that very sadly are attached to every racially minoritized community. And by talking about the N-word, we are not minimizing that there are many other communities that face horrific racial slurs. But this word is complex because there is such a history to it, the reasons why it was created, the way it is still used today, and I guess the complexities that some people can use it and some people might, can't. Why can a black person use it and then a white person can't? How's that fair? I don't know if you want me to go into a bit of that. I mean, I want to obviously give everyone a bit of room to talk, but I think there is a real loading to this word, right? And if you're white and you're using it, the chances are you're going to trigger, even if everyone's laughing, it's just done in banter, it's done in jokes. It's not a word that, lands like that for many from, black and brown and racially minoritized communities. What we hear and what we've seen is, through my work, lots of students saying, well, why do black people use it then? If it's a racial slur and it's so offensive and it was created for all of this, why is it still being used? And here's why. And I'm not saying we've got to agree with it, because I don't think, we have to, but it's about understanding. So what we saw in the 70s and 80s was a real rise of black activism and people really rising up and saying, we are expressing, black is beautiful, and that came through in activism and the arts and music and, black educationalists. And we saw a rise and a movement of people deciding to reclaim this word, a word that was used to deconstruct, disempower, destroy, by some people, not everyone in the black community, it's really important to know, took a word, and it's spelt differently when used by those that are black. It's spelt with an A at the end, as opposed to an ER. Decided to take a word and reclaim it, code switch it, to actually mean brotherhood and endearment and unity. And if we just pause to think about that, a word used to destroy is now used to unite. A word used to dehumanize is now used for brotherhood. It's confusing, but that's the reason why we saw black people say, look, I'm taking this word and it's ours now. A word you created through white supremacy to destroy our community. We're using it to rise up and elevate and push our community forward. And we see that in music, we see it in comedy, in film, and it is complex. because is that not a double standard, right? You use it, I can't. But whether you think that's a double standard or not, for me, it's more about why do you want to use it? What does it say about you? You know, what is the reason you want to use a word when you know what it is rooted and pained in? So big take-home message, and this came unanimously from all my students. No. Is it okay to use the N-word if you are not black? No, it is not okay. And I'm sorry if you struggle with that and there's a sense of, I should have a right to. There is no sense of you have a right to, you know? And that's so tricky. But that's the reason why, because it is so triggering. And for many, the experiences haven't changed. You know, people are still moving through the world with barriers of racism and discrimination. And that N-word reinforces white supremacist ideology that has not gone away, that is still showing up for many. So why use a word that can continue to reinforce that?
Absolutely, yeah. No, that's really clear. Thank you. Just looking down the questions, there's another one where this comes up. So I suppose just to clarify further for some people who've asked this, is it okay to repeat and sing along to songs with the N-word in it?
Yeah.
If you're white?
Good question. And again, I posed this to the students and everyone again said no. Everyone again said no, it's not. And again, I tried to rephrase it, but it's music. Music is universal. Music is inclusive. We think actually to when hip hop and rap began in the kind of late 70s, it was a movement to push back against systems and structures. It was designed to shock. You know, it was designed to pull down and dismantle. So that word, you know, when it comes to spelling it with an A, it's you know, it has a purpose and a meaning. But when you are a white person singing along to it, you know, you might just think it's a lyric or a song, but it's still landing in that same way.
Yeah.
So everyone, when I ask this question, and again, moving through my work, no, it's not okay. You have to intentionally pause, make an effort to not say it, make an effort to, you know, be mindful of the word and just omit it. You know, I've done one-to-ones, and this is the other part of it, the other side of working with students that are so traumatized by this word, right? That, you know, they push through their schooling or they push through their experience, but that word and the pain of it still is very much there. And unless they're getting the support, the counselling, the therapy, it's still there, because it's there in when you get rejected from a job interview. It's there when you're, you know, for the generational pain that your grandparents went through. It's more than a word, right? So if we're just saying it lightly, we don't have the right to say it lightly because it isn't a light term and it can hurt and cause that much pain. So, yeah, can a white person sing along to it in a lyric? You can do, because we can't control your behaviour. In a sense, you make that choice. You are in charge of how you conduct your behaviour. But my strong advice, and those from the black and brown communities would say the same, is to not say it. Do not sing it. That comes through very, very loud and clear.
Great. Thanks. Next question.
Is it okay to say a black person or a person of colour?
Yeah, good. I think it takes us a bit back to our first one. So language is really powerful and important, and it changes, right? It's fluid and changeable. So when I think back to when I was at school, I was called half-caste, which is language we would never use now. So language does change. When we say people of colour, not every person from racially minoritized communities or black, Caribbean diaspora would identify that way. I've got many colleagues and friends that say, no, I'm not a person of colour, because that actually reinforces the standard of whiteness by saying I'm a person of colour. I am, you know, Trinidadian, or I am, you know, St. Lucian, whatever it is, that's what I am. So it goes back to asking, making sure we ask somebody. There's lots of different inclusive terms. We're seeing terms like BIPOC, which stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Colour. As I said, you know, people of colour, black. So it is okay. Those terms there are okay. But what is more okay is to ask somebody, you know, how would you racially identify there? And I think that's going back to your signatures or having something there would be really helpful for people, you know, to know as well. Yeah. Any thoughts? What do you think?
I think it is really hard to know what the right thing to say is. And I think that you don't want to put someone in the bracket of black because they may not be black. And then obviously if you don't know, and you may not be referring to one specific person that I can go and ask. Do you know what I mean? So it is hard to navigate, because the last thing personally I'd like to do is offend anyone. So it's hard to kind of know what the right thing to say is. So I think, yeah, it's interesting because everyone's got their own personal, so you can't make everyone happy. So
No,
it's like,
and,
it's
so,
hard.
and that's why I said that language being so fluid and it changes, and sometimes there isn't, this is what you say all the time, it's what you definitely don't say all the time, because it does change. Just on what we wouldn't say though, just there is, and I've seen it, I say slip up, but I think it's just, sometimes not knowing the difference is coloured. Saying someone is coloured, that is racially offensive language, and that's, stemming from history of racially offensive language. And sometimes that, I think that people mean to say people of colour, but that coloured family as opposed to that family of colour, they're very different, even though they sound similar. So being very careful with that.
I mean, I think what's interesting around this particular topic that we're talking about right now is what Mimi said, just picking up on that, not wanting to cause offence. I think for a lot of people, and one of the main reasons we're doing this podcast is because we're trying to better understand. And I think I found myself the other day talking to a black person, and I used the phrase people of colour, and I was really fearful that I'd got that wrong. I felt maybe it didn't fall right with them. And there's always this sense that conversations aren't necessarily happening around racism because people are so frightened of getting it wrong. And I think that stifles progress. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast, because, we're trying to sort of myth bust, or trying to better understand what we can and can't say, or should and shouldn't say. And I think, yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? As Mimi said, one never wants to cause offence, but sometimes you can cause offence when you're really desperately trying not to cause offence.
Yeah.
I think that's what a lot of people struggle with. It's like, well, what can I say, and who determines what it's okay to say and what it's not okay to say? But it comes back to that. Maybe ask, maybe in that conversation I should have said, is that how is that how I should phrase it?
Are you comfortable with that?
Are you comfortable with me referring to people of colour, or should I say black? I suppose, asking. And I suppose I was hesitant to ask because I was quite nervous.
It's awkward, isn't
of getting it wrong.
It is,
and I don't want to be called out for something that I'm not. And, it's quite complicated.
It is.
Isn't it?
It really is. Yeah, it is.
I think also like the way you would art, you know what I mean? It's like if you feel comfortable being like, is that okay if I like say that? And they're like, yeah, you know what I mean? And then they're like, why are you making a big deal? I made a big deal. Like, I'm sorry, you know what I mean? It's just
and it causes this vibe or kind of experience between you two.
Why is that a big deal?
Yeah.
Why is there some weird unsaid? And then it's just, I think if you're, I don't know, maybe confident being like, is that okay for me to ask you? Like,
definitely.
I'm open, great.
Yeah.
But I think if you are feeling uncomfortable already and you may have said, what you said, automatically you're like, I probably shouldn't have said that. I'm quite sorry. Like, you know what I mean? It's hard to make sure you're getting it right.
How did it go, Soar, when you asked? Did it seem comfortable when you used that language with the...
I didn't ask. That's the point. I just clammed up and got really nervous and sort of went away from the conversation going, God, I might have just caused terrible offence. And, and sort of carried that, but and then thought, look, next time you got to ask. If you use a phrase, people of colour, and you sense that. I mean, it was a video call, so it was quite hard to pick up on. But if I relived that conversation, I would have probably said, "Are you okay with that language?"
It's tricky. I mean, even something like it's really important. Respectful, inclusive language is really important to me. So I want to make sure I get this right. Are you comfortable with this?
I
mean, it's uncomfortable to even say that, isn't it? Because it's like you're saying, we all feel a bit like we're tiptoeing and eggshelling around things. But, for that person of colour, there's probably a real sense of thank you, thank you. That means a lot. The fact you are so sensitive and mindful of this, that speaks volumes. So,
bit of a leap of faith, then, isn't it? Just taking a leap of faith, Can I just dive in with a couple of... what I would perceive as pretty heavy questions, actually. There's two that are quite similar. One is it okay to think that the British Empire was a force for good in some ways, despite its association with slavery? And one similarly linked is it okay to champion the near miraculous achievements of a largely white Christian Western hegemony? what do we say around
I
that?
don't really even know where to begin with this question. I really don't.
Yeah.
This is huge, but I think it's so important these questions come through.
Yeah.
You know, I think I'm going to be honest. When I first came here, I did my student sessions. Do you remember? There was a lot of resistance, and some of the feedback from students was interesting. You know, I'm very anti-white. This is all very woke. I'm critiquing, you know, the white British, you know, empire. I'm just angry because they're in private schools. And it was a lot of actually it was good. It was good for the school.
Yeah,
and it was good for us to know, like,
good.
where is everybody at with this, right?
Yes.
And gosh, okay, I didn't think that. And there is a real sense, and I've learned through my work of, again, I'm going to be open and honest about it because I think this is the raw conversation of males, of white males feeling, I guess, attacked as well. That you know, but there is also this real, you know, sense of this is hard, this is challenging, this is difficult. I don't want to feel like you're attacking me personally or, you know, Great Britain. And I think you were saying, Mimi, these questions are a lot, you know. And again, I'm going to be honest and say I don't think I have the answer for this because I think this is about the person asking the question.
Yes.
And where they're at. And also if they're willing to be open to where these questions have come from for them, you know? And a big piece I do is looking at racial consciousness. And that is our commitment and ability and openness to looking at our own position to race and racism and where we have learned our thoughts and our biases and, you know, doing some really quite deep work, you know? Looking at our first encounters of understanding race and our own privilege. And that's a tricky word. And I know for many that's like, again, it's not an attacking word, but there are some moving through the world that hold more privilege. And that is the truth. And whether that's something we want to accept, I can't make you accept it, but there is a truth in that. And again, when I do this piece about, you know, just the way that we don't live in a racially equitable society. We just don't, okay? Sorry to burst that, the bubble. No. But it's the truth. There are some starting off on the starting line of life at different points and no cause or fault of their own. It's just a system of systemic racism, institutional racism. It's just the way our society is structured. And when I do begin to talk about this, I get some young people and potentially some parents or, you know, individuals really struggling with that because perhaps for the first time they've been confronted with that. And I'm sort of that attacking point of like, don't challenge me about this, or, you know, it's all about, you know, critical race theory, and you're going, okay. Let's talk about the whys. Why are you feeling threatened by this word? Why are you feeling that, you know, as we're seeing here, that, where is that? I can't see it here. I'll find it, but, you know, it's not a personal attack. It's recognising the truth of the world we live in and using that privilege for good. Okay, how can we use that to elevate and champion? And there are many that don't want us to, if we're honest. You know, that's the truth of it as well, and that's uncomfortable. And I've met many of those people. And sometimes it feels like we can't, and that's the honesty of it, you know. But we can all do something. Having this conversation is part of that change. It's part of that progression. So I'm not bailing out of this question. I'm thinking, like, gosh, I think that lends itself to,
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting answer, the idea of throwing it back to them.
Yeah.
Why are you asking this question?
Yeah.
You know, what concerns do you have around it, or what is there something you're not understanding around this issue, and what, you know, why are you feeling attacked? And I mean, it's interesting what you say about white privilege. I mean, white privilege is definitely real. And actually in our sexism episode of this, we talked about male privilege and you talked about white male privilege, you know, so, these things are real, they're out there. And I suppose we're encouraging our listeners to be introspective, you know, think about, your attitude to these things and how they sit. So.
And just to add to that, I think when we talk about white privilege, you know, it's not to make anybody feel guilty. Yeah, it's not to sort of make anyone feel like, gosh, you know, I didn't ask for this, or it's not my fault. Of course, but what we're saying is, how can you use that privilege and that platform for change and dismantling and for good? Okay, that's kind of where we're going with it. So, you know, again, to the listeners, just kind of thinking, threatened by the term white privilege, it is uncomfortable, and there might be an element of like, everyone here has got privilege. We all do in different ways. But a white privilege means you don't have to deal with racism. You don't have to deal with racial discrimination. You move through the world very differently. You can go into just giving you an example, I went into classic Sainsbury's, and, you do the self-checkout, right? The zap, zap. And I don't know how many of you get the receipts, My cousin who was with me, he got the receipt because he said, I'm going to be stopped. I said, like the chance I'll be stopped by the security guard for the receipt. So many of us don't even think, I need to just make sure I've proof I bought my products, I can go into this space and know that I'm not going to be, followed or looked at differently. Yeah. It's little things like that. That's a privilege to move through the world without even thinking about that. Yeah. I can easily get a plaster that just matches my skin tone. I've never been stopped and searched by the police. I don't have to worry about that. If you're a black male, you're 10 times more likely to be stopped and searched by the police, just 10 times. And that's a conversation that many black families have to have. It's not the kind of, it's the when, it's the if. Sorry, it's not the if, it's the when you get stopped. This is how you handle yourself. And just preparing, for that. So that's what privilege is. It isn't about wealth, and it isn't about, kind of never having any hardship, because of course there are many that do, but it's about understanding that your hardships don't come because of racism. And then how can you use that to help, how can you be an ally with that? So yeah, I think we've gently touched on it, haven't we, in the most sensitive way?
I think there's another similar question.
The whole world is racist. White to black, black to white, brown to white to brown, etc. Because people are frightened of what is different. Is it okay to think that this will never change? And it really comes down to the individual and whether they're a good person or not.
That's a really heavy question, I think, for anyone, for someone who's white, black, or brown, or wherever you are from. I think I don't know where to start, to be honest.
I think it reflects the sense, and sometimes I feel it when I come out of a session. So I spend a lot of my time delivering sessions about racism and racial equity, that you just come out thinking nothing's going to change. You just come out thinking this is all just too big. Yeah. And this feels like that, kind of coming from that place of will it ever, right? Yeah. Will it ever? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, sorry, Abdul, I did cut you there.
No,
but,
no, of course. I think the idea of no, it would never change, because I do also experience that, because I live in London, where it's like, you see everyone around, it's very diverse, and yet I'm still facing racism, and I'm thinking, all right, if it's not bad in an area where it's almost all white people, I'm going back to where I'm from. Like, I've lived there for many years, and I know my area, and I'm still facing racism. I'm thinking, well, is it ever going to change? Yeah. If it doesn't change in an area where everyone's united. And no, I think it does come down to an individual. I think just being known of, I really don't think that race is ever like someone. Like, it doesn't matter if you're white or black or brown. I think if you are a good person, that's what you are. I think that's the end of it, to be honest. Whether you're a bad person or a good person, that's what you should be known as opposed to if you're black or white or brown, in my opinion. Because a lot of people aren't educated, firstly, on like sensitivity about people's races and stuff. But I think it comes down to the individual.
Such a good response. And there is so much in here, isn't there, to unpack? But I think just picking up on what you said, Abdul, we're all one race. We're all part of the human race. I know that might seem a bit cheesy, but it is so true. It's so true. And how we walk through the world, do you want to be someone that offends or hurts, or do you want to be someone that builds and reinforces solidarity and unity? So it is about you as a person. I can go in and teach a session about the M word. I can give you all of this, the trauma, what the word means, the history, but you are your person, and you will decide how you now decide to move through the world. And no one can control that. We're all responsible for our own actions. So I think it goes down to the individual, but also being mindful that small things make big things, small, tiny acts of change, or calling something out or dismantling something. This conversation here is part of, I keep saying it, but it's part of that change. And the school being so amazing and being open to that and vulnerable to that and being like, look, we want to do better. That's part of the change. Do I think racism will ever end? I get that asked a lot. I mean, I hope. That'd be my wish, but it's bigger. Racism is bigger, and that's something that we need to talk and teach in our schools. It isn't just about interpersonal racism, between people. It's a system. It's a structure. It's built on our histories. It's built in our policies. It's built in our institutions, our structures. until that's dismantled, we won't get that change. And again, this is controversial, but there are powers that be that don't want that dismantled. And again, I'm very respectful of people that might feel otherwise, but there's a truth to that, okay? So will racism ever end? That's a question I can't answer. Can we all be accountable and try to make change and contribution? Yes, we can. And I think that's what it boils down to in terms of our own individual commitment and efforts. Yeah.
Is it okay to touch Black people's hair if they are your friend?
Okay, it's a really, really good question. And the space of hair and touching people's hair comes up a lot when I work with students of colour. You've got the element of friend here, right? So the question's asking, is it okay to touch a person's hair if they're my friends? And I think that's a different dynamic. Obviously, you know your relationship with your friend. I can't really comment on that. If you've been invited to, if it feels like a safe space to, fine. But is it okay to touch a Black person's hair? Generally, a huge no. A huge, huge no. And it's actually really traumatizing for students if you are also a student in a predominantly white institution, you're the only student of colour, and people are making very insensitive comments about your hair, but then going further and trying to touch it. You don't have the right to invade someone's social space. And also hair is a really important part of identity, and there's a history and a weight to hair as well in terms of what that means for an individual. So again, this might not be known, but it wasn't, that long ago in the 1970s, we had human zoos where you could go and pet and see children from, communities, Black communities, and, created, there as though they were not human. So when it comes to touching people's hair, no, we are not animals. We're not there to be petted or touched. If you're interested and you want to know, then ask, your hairstyle, your braids look really great. Can you tell me about it? But just go up and touching someone's hair, no, absolutely not. And if it's a friend, you make the call respectfully if you think that's appropriate or not. But yeah, hair touching is a really delicate one and can make students feel very, isolated and othered just by simply trying to, touch someone's hair. And also be mindful, right? Black African Caribbean hair is awesome. It's an expression of the self, and it can change. A student can go on and come back and have different beautiful braids and brightly cut. And again, it's comments around that, I didn't know your hair grew so quickly, in a weekend, to be sensitive. But yeah, it comes from education. It comes from respectful asking as well. So
yeah, I think it's definitely very important to understand the dynamic of somebody being your friend as it is, full stop. If your relationship with that person is to the level where you're comfortable enough to touch each other's hair and you're both absolutely fine with that, no matter, I think, the person's race, because I wouldn't touch someone's hair randomly anyways, let alone if it was someone Black, because I know how it feels to adjust to a place where you're different anyway, and then someone's there sort of, I don't know, it's a bit condescending in some way, but it's very important to understand the relationship between the two. In general, as you were saying, I'm not Black, so it's difficult for me to say on somebody else's experience. I don't think it's really okay to touch anyone's hair, let alone someone who's Black, because they're already different, especially in an area like this. I think it would just make them feel a bit out of place, in my opinion, anyway. And I have seen it happen, so I'm just I'm not really a fan of it at all, to be honest. That's what I have to say.
Actually, I might just throw one more in here that I've just noticed. I think it's probably a fairly obvious answer, but I think it needs to be asked. So is it okay to use racially slanderous words in any sort of conversation, even behind closed doors, as a joke?
I mean, the fact we've got closed doors, right? Yeah. I think as soon as anything's secretive, it's wrong. So I think that the question answers itself, right? Yeah. And also, we go back to, we cannot dictate people's behaviours, and that's one of the hardest things in life, right? We can't govern that. But racially slanderous, I mean, in that in itself, it speaks volumes. It's attacking, it's offensive, it's upsetting. So yeah, I think that answer is a clear.
It comes back to that idea of why do you feel the need to do that? And therefore the act in itself, whether it's behind closed doors or not, is offensive, and therefore no.
I think even the idea of a joke itself is a bit just don't need it at all. And I think for some people, ethnic minorities anyway, they feel like they have to like agree with that joke and laugh along with it, so they feel like they're not being that weird person saying, oh no, you actually can't do that, because they feel as if they have to like cooperate with others, especially in I keep saying a place like this because it is a sort of white predominantly area. I feel like some people do feel like they have to go along with it, even though they might feel that it's not really on. And I mean, racially slanderous, and the question is a bit like, nah, it's already not on at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting you say that, Abdul, and I think, obviously we're doing a lot of work here about sort of developing an upstanding culture, and I think it's this idea of allyship that we've tried to promote, that actually, if you experience that in a room and you're a person of colour and someone's making a joke and you feel forced to, you shouldn't have to laugh along with it. And actually what should happen is one of the white people in the room should say, that's not okay. And that allyship is very, very powerful around these issues. And, that upstander culture is something that I think every school needs more of, is what I would say.
I think I would agree with you on that. I think that we talk about in the sexism podcast how the only thing that can change sexism really is the males, because it's the actions or whatever. I think it's the same in this situation. I think it shouldn't be up to that person to be felt even more isolated. It's someone who's part of that community to go, actually, that's not right, and that's not fair, and that's not kind. It's not kind, is it? And that's kind of what we preach and what we're taught. And I don't think it's up to that student who feels like, oh God, that's really offensive towards me, for them to be like, that's not right, because then you feel even more like you're ostracized, and that's not fair. So yeah, I completely agree. It should be someone who is white, and I do think that it should be very like a regular thing. I don't know, it shouldn't, like in dorms or whatever. I know rapping is you say it, and then there's someone who gets offended by that. There's a whole culture, especially in a boarding school, because I think you're always together. It's completely embedded, especially into different cultures that is associated with a boarding school. And I think that it's so important to stand up, and I do not think it should be that person. I mean, obviously if you want to and you feel strong enough, brilliant, do that. But you shouldn't be sat there being like, God, that's really offensive, and no one's saying anything. Like, that's really not right.
You got it so right, Mimi, and I'm so respectful of that awareness that that's not that person's job to do that.
Yeah.
We call that emotional labour, this expectation that you have to teach me or you have to do that. You do the work. That person is going through enough as it is. They're going through enough. So it's not their role or their job to educate or teach you. Or, I was always the one that asked to do Black History Month, or the one to do this. Well, you can do it too, right? You can learn and do the work and deliver. So I think there's such a power in that. Take up the mantle and do it yourself, and ask, of course, invite voices in and say, look, I'm on this journey, I'm trying to learn this, but don't expect that person to do it for you.
I also think it must, sorry to cut you off. No. It must be just really
exhausting.
Yeah, exhausting. Like boring in a way. It's like, right, it's happened again. I can't be arsed.
But it's more than that. It's exhausting and it's draining. And for students, it's also like a coping mechanism. So I know, Abdul, you were talking about the jokes. Firstly, it's never a joke. I just really want to spread that. It's never jokes. It's never banter if it's rooted in racial discrimination. But what you do find is students of colour laughing. And that's partly to just cope with it and not have to be spotlighted even more, like you said, not having to be called out, but also a sense of, this is just what I've got to deal with. And part of my armour is laughing so that I'm shielding myself from that pain. But don't mistake that laughter that it's okay, because it's not. It's part of the way they're coping.
Yeah. Good, I'm glad we covered that on.
Is it okay not to want to talk about it because it makes me feel awkward? I think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming this is coming from a person that's white, asking, but we can look at it from both angles. Is it okay to not want to talk about it because it makes me feel awkward? If you are white or racially identify as white, I think it's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay to feel awkward. None of this is easy. Racism is not a light, easy, candy floss subject. It's going to make us feel uncomfortable. It's going to emote us in certain ways and potentially leave the conversation not feeling all neat and sorted and it's done. As I said, asking or provoking more questions and answers. So I think that my first response to that is, it's okay to feel awkward, but is it okay to not want to talk about it? we have to talk about it. Like, we can't shy away from things because it's uncomfortable, and that's for parents as well. I've a mother to 4 children, and there's a real intentionality behind having these difficult, uncomfortable conversations from quite a young age. You know, we know, according to studies, from as young as sort of 5, children are making, you know, racial, assumptions and understandings. So we can't leave this until a young person is like 16, 17, 18 out into the world, and, you know, they haven't had these deep, powerful, uncomfortable conversations. So yeah, it is uncomfortable, it is awkward. I get that you don't want to talk about it. Sometimes I don't want to talk about it for all different reasons. I'm like, again, here we go again, or why are we still doing this? Like Abdul was saying, living in London in 2025 and still facing racism, like, it can feel really disheartening. Like, is it going to change? But unless we, if we stop talking, that's when the danger is. And I do get some parents saying, but if we talk about it, it makes it worse. If we stop talking about it, it'll go away. Racism isn't going to go away. If we stop talking about it, it's not going to vaporize and disappear. The only way we can challenge and dismantle is to educate and raise awareness. So the silence is the danger. You know, the talking is where the power is, and not just talking, but action as well. So I'm sorry that it feels uncomfortable, but you're uncomfortable and feeling awkward compared to how a person of colour's feeling is, they don't have the right or the option to clock out of it. So therefore you don't have the right or option to clock out of it, which I know is hard, hard hitting.
And that's why we're having this conversation on this podcast. Okay, final 2 questions then, shall we?
Is it okay for a black person to be racist to a white person?
Yeah, this is a good question and comes up a lot. Can a black person be racist to a white person? I guess it really boils down to your definition of racism and what that is. If it goes down to that interpersonal racial discrimination between 2 different races, then yeah, a black person can be racially discriminatory to another group, of course. When it comes to racist in the sense of systemic racism, institutional racism, I think we've got to be careful. And that's sometimes, what we call reverse racism. And there are many within the black community and racially minoritized communities that feel very strongly that it's not a thing, okay? Because what you see with racism is a system of oppression and a system of white supremacy, and that is reinforced by policies and governments and people in power and institutions. Black people don't have that. They don't have that behind them. So the reinforcement of racism, it's not the same. It can't be felt and experienced the same way. So there are many that feel, whether listeners agree or not, that black people can't be racist to white people. Racially discriminatory, racially triggering, prejudice, yes, but racist, when we think where racism was birthed from, can black people do that? Again, it's sensitive and complex, but there is a strong feeling amongst the black community that no, black people can't be racist to white people. And if that's something that you struggle with in listening to that, it's potentially good to look into that a little bit and think why, and start doing a little bit of deep work as to why that's uncomfortable for you. And
have you got any advice moving forward?
Yeah, thank you. Such a good question, because we want to leave on a positive. This is not a light, easy theme. I know some of us have listened to this podcast and felt quite heavy, and actually that's good. I want us to feel challenged and also moved by the power of this, the depth of this conversation. But in terms of what we can all do is to keep the conversations going, keep engaged, keep locked into revisiting, re-talking about themes. Maybe there's a question that you want to go back to, or you could open up in a conversation at home or with your peers, or, don't just move on. That's the danger. Don't just listen and carry on. We want to be change makers. So books create such a sense of belonging, and there are so many great books in the library here. Online, pick up a book about, either written by an author of colour or a book about racial equity or change. There's so much. Start doing something that interests you in terms of maybe looking at a documentary or just, things that you're engaged in. Ask questions and don't be afraid to ask questions. That's the biggest thing. Find someone you can talk to and ask. If you are a racially minoritized individual and you feel like some of this, has got to you, talk. I think there's such a power in talking and being courageous, right? I talk about courageous conversations, but being prepared to be uncomfortable to, see that change and progress. So I think keep conversations going is the best thing.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank
That's
you.
a wrap.
Very much.
Thank you.